Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And if it looks like I might be bursting into laughter at any moment, it's because I have been giggling a lot with my guest, who is Marcos Patchett. Hello, Marcos.
Hello, hi Anna, hi everyone. Hello, hello, hello.
So Marcos is back. He is a medical astrologer, and we thought we might have a bit of fun today and talk about the 12 signs and plants that go with them. But before we start, for those who are new to the concept of medical astrology, Marcos, could you please explain what it is?
I guess I'll try and do that relatively simply, Anna. It's simply astrology used for medical purposes. There, I'm done. I'll finish there. No, let's go a little bit further than that. It does have it's a very, very old use of astrology. In fact, it's probably one of the earliest uses of astrology. It was always used alongside medicine. Even the very earliest sort of pre-horoscopic divinatory tablets from Sumeria have things formulae on the medicinal formulae and that sort of thing. But the kind that I am interested in and teach really reached its sort of apex just after the Renaissance, sort of in the early modern period. So English astrologers that we're familiar with, like William Lilly or Nicholas Culpeper, who was a herbalist, physician astrologer, or really an apothecary astrologer. And it's a really useful guidance system along when used alongside medicine, particularly traditional forms of medicine like Western herbal medicine, because it evolved alongside it. So a lot of the concepts and some of the ways that astrology can be used to analyze situations are very compatible with traditional medicine systems. So, and this is true around the world for different forms of astrology in different cultures, incidentally, where you sort of like look at things in terms of, for example, very empirical and subjective and non-replicable, and therefore from a scientific perspective totally non-scientific, but from a traditional perspective and an experiential perspective very valid method of sort of looking at what is somebody's experience of an illness. So is it hot, is it cold, is it wet, is it dry, where in the body is it affecting them? But you're looking at it not in terms of fine microbiology and pathology, but sort of the overall patterns of dysfunction. And astrology is really useful for analyzing that. So you could use medical astrology traditionally, not only for looking at the broader context of an illness, like where's it come from? What are what's the sociological or social causes of this disease? What are the psychological, as we'd now frame it, causes of this disease? And what are the humoral, the sort of what we now call energetics, the sort of hot, cold, damp, dry patterns of dysfunction underlying it, and then to help determine remedies. So I think of it as a guidance system, and it's a really, really useful one. Does it replace modern biomedical diagnostics? No, because it's a different order of thing, but it can be very usefully used alongside it, sort of like in a Venn diagram manner. So you've got your biomedical information all about the microscopic causes of this disease and what its pathology is on a biological level. And then you might have from the tradition certain plants or remedies or strategies that you might use to address those symptoms or that particular disease. And then you've got your astrological information, which tells you all about the broader context and helps you explore that and generate more treatment options. So that is my potted and slightly rambling explanation of medical astrology, which is, by the way, a vast, vast area. And I have dipped one toe in the shallow end of an ocean in describing that to you now. So, yes.
It is vast. And I think the thing that has recently come to my attention, which surprised me very pleasantly, is to discover that there are still herbalists out there who are not astrologers or medical astrologers, but who are talking about temperament in the context of illnesses. And I interviewed one for my In the Light Growing Your Soul podcast recently, and her name is Christine Herbert. Absolutely
Yes.
wonderful herbalist, but she
Mhm.
talks about this. She talks about temperament, and in fact, I've also just recently interviewed a wonderful iridologist for the same channel, Andrew Mason, who's talking about behavioral iridology
Okay.
and temperament, etc. So these are very important um, understandings that are as valid today as they ever were.
Yeah, I agree. I think the old humoral sort of temperament model of understanding is incredibly useful because and it doesn't map very well onto the modern biomedical understanding because you can have, you know, three people with the same disease from a modern pathological standpoint will have three different patterns of dysfunction from a traditional standpoint. And people are nowadays more familiar with traditional Chinese medicine with its yin yang and different organ functions and whatever. Well, there was actually a very similar thing in the Western tradition where not only would you describe, say, a disease of choler or heat, but then you'd have in that disease of choler, maybe the heart is overheated, the spleen is overheated, but the liver is cold. So they actually broke it down to individual organ functions, and different organs had different temperatures that they should be maintained at that temperature, otherwise it would cause disease. Now, from a physiological point of view, all of that is like, what do you mean the liver's supposed to be slightly warm and the heart's supposed to be hot and, you know, the spleen is cold? And this is not, but these are empirical, subjective descriptions based on just patterns of symptoms and reaction. They're not about if you took a thermometer and stuck it in somebody's spleen, would it be cold? No, it's about cold is a descriptor of process. So cold is slow, cold doesn't move very much, cold is relatively inert, heat is the opposite, heat is very active, cold goes in, heat goes out, and so on. So if somebody has an excess of cold in their behavior, they're not moving very much, they may look pale, they're relatively static. Somebody who's an excess of heat, they might be a bit frenzied, moving around too much, they might be sweating, flushed, yada yada. So they're very simple to understand from a metaphorical point of view, but metaphor doesn't map well onto biology. So they're different orders of thing. But in terms of selecting remedies, these things have proven to be enormously robust and enormously useful. And it sometimes blows my mind, and I get irritated by it, that people will very often accept traditional Chinese medicine as a wonderful, sophisticated thing. And yet you get snarky Wikipedia articles written about Western humoral medicine, about how it's all been superseded and it was a load of old superstitious nonsense. No, it was highly sophisticated. If you go back into a lot of the old books, you'll see that they had very detailed, sophisticated formulae addressing different imbalances. And, you know, I don't know that there have been any studies of this, and I am aware that I am going on a rambling tangent here, but there are so many hobby horses here I could ride into the distance, and this is just one of them, that there are some really, really excellent formulas. And one of the things that I would be very curious about, and I'm not sure such a study has ever been done, is to see how, for example, in the Middle Ages, when everyone talks about, you know, Middle Ages has become synonymous with, you know, in the vernacular with poor standard of healthcare, you know, like the Monty Python idea of the peasants harvesting mud and whatever, which is funny. But actually, I wonder if the people who had access to this very sophisticated sort of apothecary healthcare might not, how long would they have lived? And because the issue is in the past, none of this knowledge was centralized very well, particularly in Europe. And you had, you know, the midwife or the healer in one village didn't necessarily know what the midwife or the healer in the next village was doing. And then you had the rich who had access to the university educated professional astrologer physicians, and then the poor who had no such thing. They didn't even know what day they were born very often. So you had an enormous disparity in availability of medical knowledge and treatment. And it would be my suspicion, but I don't have the receipts, I don't know, I don't think anyone's done this study, that the people who had access to a better standard of living, as always in history, as now, tended to live longer. And those who had access to that sophisticated healthcare before the advent of modern chemistry, when everything started going, there was a sort of what I call the crazy period in the crossover from Galenic old school humoral medicine to modern medicine, where people were giving huge doses of mercury salts and antimony and stuff like that. You know, when alchemy started becoming fashionable and people started graduating from the early, very cautious use of tiny doses of alchemical salts internally to huge doses of mercuric chloride as a cure-all, which it was, and this was, I think, that transition period from the old humoral empirical models to the modern sort of scientific model, when the knowledge on either one the knowledge was eroding and being subsumed, and with the new technologies the knowledge wasn't there yet, so there were huge amounts of poisonings and bleedings and terrible things happening. But anyway, yeah.
I suspect you're right, though, because if we look at the success that traditional Chinese medicine has in terms of helping people um, with various problems, I think that's comparable to what you would expect with the pre um, pre period that you've just
I
described.
think so.
I would say so, and I think it stands to reason that depending on where you live, you are going to have to access to healers of different abilities.
Yeah.
Uh, and you know, if it's so obvious, and then you add to that the lack of food available very often,
Oh,
and the lack of warmth in the winter.
oh, yes, huge fundamentals. Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
and
And
that's before we even start factoring in the pollution that comes later with the Industrial Revolution.
I think, as you say, there's a great nutritional disparity, and you know, nowadays we all sort of live like medieval kings in many ways. You know, with the access that we have to heat and light and food and things because of these revolutions of modern technology. So I'm by no means a Luddite, but I also think that there's a lack of nuance and a baby bathwater problem very often when people appraise history, because a lot of these so in Chinese medicine or in traditional medicine like Ayurveda or in Western traditional medicine, a lot of these formulae are amazingly sophisticated and I think really good for correcting systemic imbalances that tend to ill health. They're not so good for very virulent epidemics, or very advanced bacterial infection, because there comes a point with the body when it goes beyond a tipping point, either because somebody's got an infection, it's gone beyond a point, or there's a really new virulent pathogen that's killing people like the Black Death did, and it kills people like that, or like the influenza of 1919, you know, the early part of the 20th century. You get a very virulent pathogen. Most traditional medicine systems, not they're not useless. They have some useful fortifying agents, but that is not their forte. Their forte is usually strengthening or renormalizing, redirecting people towards homeostasis. And so in those acute situations, I think acute situations is something which really is the forte of modern medicine, with its sort of burn, cut, kill approach to everything. It's brilliant at that. You know, it's almost like it's and to our theme, what strikes me, what's always interests me, is that most of the drugs and pharmaceutical approaches adopted by biomedicine would, in medieval astrological medicine, have been classified as ruled by Saturn or Mars, or in the Kabbalah by under on the left-hand pillar of severity, whereas the Venusian and jovial drugs, the gentle remedies, the ones which are the most highly thought of, are nowadays by pharmacy mostly discarded, because those drugs would be more food grade, more gentle, more broadly applicable, more suitable whether in sickness or in health, and have a supportive, mollifying, or adjustive action. It's interesting that most of the pharmaceuticals that we now employ are extracted from plants that were traditionally said to be ruled by Mars or Saturn. You know, pokey, cutty, burny, suppressy, poisonous, toxic drugs that have an intense and very useful action, but they work on the extreme end. So I think there's an inversion of the hierarchy of importance in a sense in traditional medicine systems and in modern biomedicine, where an inversion of also of capability, where traditional medicine does, broadly speaking, quite well with chronic conditions which require adjustment, and does least well and deprioritizes, in a sense, acute conditions which are immediately life threatening. And the exact opposite is true of modern medicine, which is frankly amazing for life threatening acute situations, and sometimes pretty bloody appalling for the management of long term illness, because it robs Peter to pay Paul very frequently. You know, you kind of end up taking a drug to deal with problem A, and then you end up with problems B, C, and D down the line as a result of the drug that you were taking, and then you end up on the drug escalator. So, you know.
And where I find it woefully lacking is in the recognition that the body is a system as a whole, and that
Yeah.
and getting to the root cause of an issue seems to be anathema to them. It's, you know.
Well, it's almost a language problem as well, and I totally agree. Obviously, I mean, it's almost a language problem. Maybe not language isn't. It's a teaching problem. It's a mindset problem. It's a paradigm problem. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
End of the day, sort of brain slightly mushy. Takes me a bit longer, but so it's a paradigm problem, because you know that it's the way that modern medicine works is to, as I say, look at the microscopic, look at the small mechanisms. So it's very segmented. I mean, healthcare is totally segmented. You have a specialist for your joints, and another specialist for your stomach, and another specialist for your lungs, and another. It's like all of these bits are connected. You know, they're not operating in a vacuum. But but there's a reason for that, obviously, because it's, to me, modern medicine is in astrological terms, which I know would be anathema to any great fan of modern medicine who isn't interested in astrology, rare fish indeed. But it's a Virgo thing. It's a Mercury and Virgo discipline. It's Mercury in its exaltation and domicile. It's a super strong. It's great at that statistics, that analysis, that microscopy, that looking down at the fine mechanisms, the fine grain, separate, pull it all apart. That's how this works. Look at how this ticks. And that's amazing. But it's lost the Jupiter element of it, which is the big picture stuff, the meaning of this. And that's what traditional medicine foregrounded. So, yeah, I always think of astrology as being, if we were to describe it using circular logic in astrological language, to me, astrology would be a Mercury and Sagittarius discipline. So that's Mercury in its detriment. It has some issues there with perhaps coherence or you know, logical consistency at times, but it's the human mind, Mercury, and the imagination, both traditionally ruled by Mercury. Logic and imagination were both ruled by Mercury, trying to look at the whole tundra, like to look at a large landscape and making these connections. So is it as powerfully analytical on the small level as Mercury and Virgo? No, because Mercury and Virgo, you're looking at things on a microscopic level under the microscope. With Mercury and Sag, you're trying to look at the whole tundra through a microscope. We're limited by the scope of the human mind. All divination is. But I think what it can do, what astrology does do, and traditionally did do in medicine, and still does do, in my view, is help people reconnect to the larger picture a little bit. So you can kind of see that some of the some of the issues that have led up to a particular disease appearing, what that disease means, why is this happening to me, what does it mean, and in finding out the meaning, you can very often give people a key, if not to resolve it, then to manage it, you know, optimally to resolve. But cure isn't always possible, because it, you know, depends on the situation. So, you know, it'd be nice if it were. But
I think, you know, one of the things that I have really come to appreciate about herbalism is that there are so many factors that a herbalist would have to consider before choosing a remedy. Because, you know, and here's the difference. Whatever the problem is, there seems to be lots of different herbs that might be able to tackle it.
mm-hmm.
How do you choose which one? You choose the one by understanding the root of the problem for the person, because the symptoms might be the same as somebody else, but the root cause might be different. And then they are also weighing up the individual themselves. So this is an extraordinary thing. It is not just about dispensing something. It is about taking into account everything around it, from the root of the issue to the person themselves and the circumstances in which they
Yeah.
are presenting themselves. So I think that that is something that has been lost with allopathic medicine, and yet it is very, very much alive when I look at what herbalists do. And I think to bring in the element of the chart, whether you're looking, well, in medical astrology, obviously we're looking at a consultation chart or the temperature chart, but nevertheless, that is of the moment. And I don't think there's something here about the dynamic energy of the astrologer or healer and the connection with the individual. And it's not something that I'm even particularly good at describing, because it's pretty intangible. But we talk about it being divinatory. Well, what does that mean? It means that you it's something that AI can't do. And AI can't do it because it's not just about following rules. It's about that feeling that you get when you look at something and you go, I wonder if, and then the other person goes, do you know, it's funny you should say that because, or no, I don't think so. And then goes away and thinks, maybe there's something to that. That's something that is quite indescribable. And but it's very much alive, an energy, a sense.
That's interesting. I mean, I agree with most of that. I do think there are some interesting, just going back to what you said about allopathic medicine can't do that. There are some interesting branches, like the new functional medicine thing, although it's a
Yes.
bit like it goes like down the insane rabbit hole of 10 billion tests and then usually prescribes 10 billion supplements, which, it gets very, very expensive and, whatever. But but there are certainly efforts made to get to the root of the thing, and a good, so it just depends what level of analysis you're applying, because from a modern diagnostician's point of view, a biomedical diagnostician, the root of the issue might be, aha, I've put my finger on the disease that it is. And whereas from a herbalist point of view, they'd be like, it's like, as per the Hippocratic maxim, it is more important to know what sort of person has the disease than what sort of disease a person has, and that's a Hippocratic maxim, OG Hippocrates, whenever he was born. But so the point is, each system has its different priorities, and the traditional system tends to value, as you were implying, the context and the individual, that sort of rather unpredictable relationship between the practitioner and the client, or between the client and the remedy. And as you say, it's sort of like selecting these things is an art form, although my favorite form of herbalism is when it's so bloody simple. It's like all arts, it's like martial arts or something. Somebody who's really good at it always makes it look really simple, and when it comes together, it's amazing. Like the story you were telling last one of the times I was on your pod, about your partner when his neck went out,
Humphrey.
and you just found comfrey, whacked it on his neck, and it sorted it out. And that works on every level of analysis, because, if you look at some of the metaphysics of comfrey, from a traditional point of view, it's a Saturn herb. It strengthens the bones. It helps mending connective tissue. But it also, in terms of the sort of the poetry of the plant, the identity of the plant spirit, if you like, it has this mucilaginous, soft, supportive quality. And I have no doubt, although I don't know because I wasn't personally involved in that, but if you looked at some sort of decumbiture around that, that the decumbiture, the astrology would probably show a need for some Saturn herbs or some Saturn treatments, but it might also show some of the context of why that Saturn needed support in his life at that time and why it was showing up in his neck, you know. But I'm not asking you to talk on that, Anna, because
No, I was just thinking
yeah,
about it because at the time I hadn't really discovered medical astrology, and it was actually possibly a month or two before our very first conversation on
right,
this channel. Um, but what I do think when I'm thinking about it is that he was going through Saturn transits
right.
at the time. Actually, now thinking back, there were Saturn transits because I remember thinking, "Oh, this is so typical." He can't move. Saturn, like he literally. I mean, he was in so much pain and he could not move. And I don't know.
What year was this, Anna? Can you remember?
Now that would have been 2022,
So
23.
Saturn was in Aquarius at the time.
No, no,
It was in Pisces
it was
or
Capricorn.
Capricorn. So it must have been a bit. It must have been 2020 then, because I mean 2022 it would have been in Aquarius, I think.
Yes, it would have been. So maybe 21. 20.
Anyway, okay, that
Yeah,
makes sense. Well, because the point there is that would have been a strong Saturn. Maybe it was retrograde, but if it was beating something up in his chart, that that so, yeah. When you get so you could look at it just even without looking at a chart. You go, okay, so neck, there's something. There could be something because the body symbolism can be so on the nose, not to coin a pun, but it can be so literal. Like
yeah,
if it's neck, it's sometimes you could be a bit worried about support, or something about we say people pain in the neck. They could be being annoyed, or what I mean. There could
yeah,
all sorts of
absolutely.
potential things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these are all the different strands that we can untangle when we're working, we're working, and certainly with you,
Well,
working with the body, you're going
yes, this is why I love astrology, though, because it can help you pin the tail on the donkey much more accurately. Because you're kind of thinking it could be this, it could be that, it could be that, and then you look at a chart and you work through it and go, it's definitely that thing. This
yeah,
is the key issue. Look, so yeah,
brilliant. Well, now I said we would have a little look at
we can do a whistle
uh,
stop tour if you
and I
like.
think it needs to be a whistle stop tour. Our discussion has led us in other directions, but yes, let's see what plants go with what sign.
Well, first of all, preamble. All plants traditionally, as with everything, were classified under different planets based on their primary features. And that could be things like their habit, how they grow, their habitat, like where they grow, their medicinal uses, what else? Mythology, even. So a bunch of different things. So some plants really declare themselves for a particular planet, like chilies, Mars, nettles, Mars. Mars ones are often really obvious. Some Saturny plants are sort of like stinky, shade-loving plants that sort of like to grow in the dark, like lots of mosses are Saturn-loving. It's not that mosses are stinky, but they're kind of like low ground covering, whatever. So some of them are really obvious, but that was the primary level of sort of assignation. Because if you could give what's called a rulership to a medicine or a plant, then you can match it to a disease or condition more immediately. So if somebody had a problem where their chart called for Saturn, maybe if you're looking for a constitutional remedy for somebody and they have a Capricorn or Aquarius rising, then certain Saturn medicines may always be somewhat helpful for them through their life because they're ruled by Saturn natally. But more often, as you say, that you're looking at a decumbiture or a consultation chart. In other words, the chart of a specific medical situation where really any ruler can come up, so somebody might natally be ruled by Saturn, but in the consultation or decumbiture chart they might be Taurus rising, so they might have a Venus plant be selected. Anyway, I won't get too much into the weeds on that. Oh my god, so many random puns I'm throwing out today. But the point is, the first thing was to select a planet for a plant or a medicine, And then the sign was very much secondary and of lesser importance on a technical level. So to give you an example, so for Aries, let's start with Aries. So Venus in Aries, so Venus plant, brambles. Now, Culpeper said brambles are Venus in Aries. Now, why are brambles Venus? Because they're really prickly and aggressive and they grow really quickly. Well, because they produce soft, edible, tasty, sweet fruit. And they're essentially non-toxic. They're highly edible. They're quite beneficial herbally, and they were used to treat ailments of the throat and of the nether regions as well, because they're slightly astringent, as well as digestive stuff being slightly binding. So very gentle food grade plant, and actually in the rose family, and the flowers look like little roses because they're in that family. So Venus, but in Aries, and Culpeper says in his herbal, if anyone asks why she's why she is so prickly, tell them it is because she is within the house of Mars. And I love this. I love this situation of brambles as Venus in Aries, because the Aries bit is the spikiness, obviously, the fact that it's so soft, it's so quick, fast growing. Like brambles in summer can grow like an inch a day. They're insanely quick growing. And of course, they are invasive, which is a very Aries thing, but they're still Venus. You can chop them back. They're not going to really sting you. They might give you a little scratch or whatever, but you get tasty fruit. They've got beautiful, pretty flowers and all the rest of it. So they're just an aggressive Venus. So Venus in Aries. And then you've got, say, Taurus, Venus and Taurus. Now, what Taurus plants? I think only one Taurus plant that jumps straight to mind, because I actually think roses, red roses, might be, because I often think of them as Taurus, but I actually think they might be Venus in Capricorn. So we'll come to them later. But so Taurus, you might put something like, Culpeper says lovage is a herb of the sun in Taurus. Why? Mainly because of its medicinal use. It was used to heat the throat, like for cold diseases of the throat. And he thought it was a herb of the sun because herbs of the sun were generally sort of fortifying to the system. They were sort of, they countered venom. In other words, they helped you fight off infections and stuff like that. And they were often quite aromatic. But he classified that as the sun in Taurus, mainly, I think, for its medicinal action on the throat. So Gemini, what herbs in Gemini? I think, and though I'm not sure of this one because I don't think this is a traditional assignation, but I think valerian might be a Mercury and Gemini herb. It was assigned to Mercury, valerian root, which is, it's a sedative, relaxing herb. I'd put it in Gemini because it was used for, it's nowadays mostly used for nervous system problems. And because it was used for windiness, like farting and so on, which is very much. But what's interesting about valerian is for some people, most people it acts as a sedative and relaxant. For a few people, it acts as a stimulant. And it does seem to have this biphasic action where if you give very high doses, people can start getting headaches and jitteriness and stuff like that. So to me, and also it's said to be warm and moist, valerian. So I think it's a Mercury and Gemini plant. And also it's usually combined with other sedatives because its effect wears off as a sedative if you have it for a while. And it's mostly useful in combination with other things, all of which suggest to me Mercury, the messenger planet associated with the nervous system, but in Gemini. What else? So we've got Cancer, daisies, Venus in Cancer. So Cancer, nice, cold, watery, cool and watery sign. Daisies were a herb of Venus in Cancer, according to Culpeper. Why? Because they were appropriated, again, medicinal uses to wounds in the breast. Very interestingly, he said very specifically to wounds in the breast. And they're also supposed to be slightly relaxing and they sort of a little bit uplifting. Daisies I haven't experimented with very much, but they're supposed to be very, very good for wounds in the chest and relaxing and uplifting. And they were supposed to be slightly cooling traditionally. So that's another reason maybe to put them in a water sign. And they do also flower very often when the sun is in Cancer. So, you know, that's another little helpful thing in the Northern Hemisphere, I have to add. Then we've got Leo. What Leo herb? Lots of Leo herbs. I think I'll probably go for calendula or marigolds because they are the sun in Leo and very obviously so. What's another one there? Oh, St. John's wort. That's another nice sun in Leo herb, hypericum. So Leo, because it's hot. Let's start with the planet. So the sun, Hypericum as the sun, because again, it was an anti-venom herb. It was a herb that was used to strengthen the heart. Nowadays, we see that as the emotional center. But again, it sort of flowers in midsummer, and it was seen as a solar herb, the bright yellow flowers. Um, and it also produces this bright red oil. But my favorite Leo herb is actually, and this is one that I assigned myself and I'm very confident of, is hellebore as Saturn in Leo. And black hellebore, because it contains black hellebore is traditionally used to treat melancholy. It's very toxic, so it's suitable for a Saturn herb. It likes the shade, it has gloomy looking leaves, so all Saturn, Saturn, Saturn. But it flowers in midwinter and it has this very, very showy bloom. Like, look at me. And it flowers when everything else is dead and there are no pollinators around, which is all very Saturn in Leo, if you know about that. It's like malignant narcissism. But it's got one of the reasons I put it in Saturn and Leo, apart from all those psychological bits, is because it actually contains bufadienolides, which are chemicals that are found in frogs going to the Saturn, some psychotropic frogs like bufo. But the bufadienolides stimulate the heart. So these psychoactive chemicals also found in some toads and frogs that stimulate the heart, found in the roots of hellebore. So definitely to me a Saturn in Leo herb. Are we on to Virgo now? So stop me at any point, Anna, because I'll just keep going around the zodiac. We're just going to whiz through.
I just love it. And the thing is that I'm very familiar with all of these plants, and I can just see it. I could see the hellebores, and
Well,
they are.
that one, I admit, all the others are traditional. I think Valerian Culpeper says is a herb of Mercury, but he doesn't assign to a sign. He doesn't put it in a sign. That's one I've guessed at. The Saturn in Leo assignation for hellebore, that's mine, but I'm very confident of that. Just there's too many layers of things stacking up with it. The Virgo, again, I don't know if there are any traditional plants put in a Virgo, but I can put two there just off the top of my head. Chamomile and bilberry I would put as Virgo. So bilberry I'd say is Jupiter in Virgo. Chamomile is the sun in Virgo. Let's do bilberry because everybody knows chamomile. Chamomile's amazing, by the way, so I love it. It's amazing herb. But bilberry is a herb of Jupiter in Virgo. Jupiter was the main assignation because it strengthened the blood, it strengthened the digestion, and we now know that it has actually the action of strengthening little blood vessels and improving microcirculation. But that micro might give you a clue as to why I would put it under Virgo. And also, if you look at the plant, it has lots of little leaves and lots of little berries. It has this multi sort of like spread out, like lots of little parts thing that you'd expect with something in Virgo. And the other reason it was given to Jupiter, strengthening digestion, again, I put it in Virgo because Virgo rules the small intestine. And one of the uses of bilberries was to treat diarrhea because it will bind things up a little bit, which, of course, diarrhea may originate from the large intestine or the small, but it helps with that sort of binding starting in the small intestine. So I think there's enough for me to suggest that that bilberry is Jupiter in Virgo. Libra. There's a few interesting ones that are assigned to Libra traditionally, but I'm going to go for another off-label one that I assigned myself. And this is the Polynesian psychoactive herb Kava Kava or Piper methysticum, which is a numbing anesthetic that is incredibly relaxing and also anesthetizes the urinary tract particularly. And if drunk in excess, it can cause temporary skin problems. So it's a Saturn herb for sure. It's numbing and anesthetic, but it's Saturn in its exaltation in a sign ruled by Libra. It was called the drink of peace. It was used to broker treaties. It has a bit of a smell like lilacs, but it tastes like an anesthetic mud. It's not very pleasant tasting if you drink it, but it does have this numbing, relaxing, soporific effect. And specific action on the urinary tract. And traditionally, Libra ruled the kidneys, and Scorpio ruled the bladder and the lower bits, but Libra ruled the kidneys and the lower back, and it was used for back pain as well. So that's my Saturn in Libra herb. Scorpio. Oh, okay. So I would put, there's a few herbs I can think of Scorpio, but let's go for rhubarb root. I would say rhubarb is Mars in Scorpio. It was Mars herb, interestingly, because it had those bright pink stems and those bright yellow roots when you cut through them, because the anthraquinones. But it's a Mars in Scorpio herb because it is a laxative. It works on those Scorpio bits of the body. If you take a lot of it, it will make you poo yourself. So that is, that's a sort of like very cathartic Scorpio type action. So Scorpio ruled the bowels traditionally, and the nether regions, and yellow was the color of Mars or bile. So Mars herb in Scorpio probably there, and also a dignified Mars. Ruled Scorpio would be expected to have some benefits, and there've lots of studies on the anthraquinones, the laxative compounds in rhubarb, having sort of anti or cancer protective effects and benefits for the kidneys, stuff like that, which is very interesting because, of course, the kidneys are a Venus part of the body. But Scorpio and Venus is in detriment in Scorpio, but also in triplicity. So I might be getting too far into the technical here, but the point, yeah,
it's what I find interesting too, as you're talking about rhubarb, is that it's very popular, very loved as a food, but
yes,
you're talking about it being Mars, and so it's to be used with caution. And you were talking about the roots as a remedy,
yeah.
needing to be used with caution. But we know that we can't eat the leaves either.
Yes, because the oxalates and then that will damage
Exactly.
the kidneys. Yes, thank you, Anna. Yes,
Exactly. And
absolutely.
so that's a nice little example there of how, Mars herbs, are, you have to
A little bit
treat it
spiky,
with respect.
a little
Yeah,
bit pokey.
with
Yeah.
respect. So I think, I'm conscious of your time, but it is just in what you've done there. You've shown the logic. You've shown the logic of the signatures in it,
Oh, it's a total rabbit hole. I mean, you can absolutely, thank you, Anna. I mean, you can go down that sort of. There's many more layers, but I would emphasize that the tradition, the most important thing was finding the planet that ruled the plant, and in about 70% of cases, there's agreement between authors, but in 30% of cases, you'll find different authors say different things. So yeah.
Just before you go, something has occurred to me because of the doctrine of signatures. It seems to us in the modern age that it's a little bit hit and miss, the idea that you're looking at a plant and thinking it reminds you of something, and then you have associations, etc. But I will just leave our audience with this thought. Animals, we now know, can choose plants to heal themselves. And their choices of the foods that they eat, generally, if they haven't been tampered with by our human tastes, etc., left to their own devices, they make good food choices, and they make good choices when it comes to looking for plants that heal them. And the name escapes me. It's zoo something. But there is a study of this. And I think if we're looking at our animals and understanding that intuitively they know what they need, that gives you an insight into how we came to know what we needed. And as we evolved, then we begin to have more experience, more associations, remembering, passing things on through the generations. And I can see exactly how one day, at some point, we arrived at a doctrine of signatures, which is still helping us to this day.
Yeah, I love that, Anna, and I also think, I don't know, I think this is a really interesting, because this is on the border of why even does divination work, why even does astrology work, and to me that the big sort of the thing is consciousness. There's something about consciousness here, and the substrate of what even is reality, which is the elephant in the room here, which I think is fascinating, because to me, it's very clear, having worked with this for 15 years, that it really does work. It works reliably enough that you can look at a chart and say, oh, seems to be the situation with what's going on with you. This seems what's likely to happen. There's a lot of, and in terms of remedy selection as well, it's very helpful. When you say you analyze it, or you look at it from a purely reductionist point of view, it's like, how can this work? You're just saying this plant belongs to Mars because it's red or yellow and it does these, and yet it does. So if it works practically, if you use the system and it works in practice, I know this logic will convince no skeptic or no scientist, but the fact that it has been in use for millennia, argument from history, I'm aware, but also, if I may invoke the, what's it called? Brain, end of day, help. When you find cultures separated by millennia and continents and oceans who have evolved and developed very similar parallel concepts, it seems to be more of a stretch of logic to say, well, of course they have, because we all share human brains, so we're going to come up with similar things, than to say, no, these technologies that they developed enabled them to survive and thrive, enabled humanity to survive and thrive, and everybody came up with similar the perennial philosophy. That's the thing I was looking for, the perennial philosophy. So and there are many different forms of astrology, many different forms of these systems. So I don't believe any of these things are monolithic. So what we're not looking at is one absolute truth in the same way that scientific analysis attempts to get to one underlying mechanism. What you're looking at is a kind of, in my view, a sort of mind machine that you've created, a lens in the mind, a window, a sort of a lens really to look at things and find truths. And though there can be many different shapes and designs of those lenses, but that the fact that there's a continuity of logic and method in all these different cultures all around the world through history tells me that something of our traditional methods of divination and philosophy and magical thinking, so-called nowadays, have great validity and usefulness. But anyway, I'll leave it there.
I don't think you're alone in thinking that. So
good. Yeah.
You're alone. Thank you so much, Marcos. If people want to find you, how do they do that?
Thank you. Well, I've got my own little website, which is nocturnalherbalist.com. But I wanted to mention today, I've started a brand new little school of medical astrology. And this is geared mainly towards therapists and herbalists. So that's people who practice herbal medicine, but also any, psychotherapists, homeopaths, doctors, anyone who does any one-to-one therapy. And we're just developing the track of astrology for practitioners, medical astrology for practitioners. But then we're also going to be, hopefully in the near future, launching a little separate track of herbalism for astrologers as well. So going in that direction too simultaneously. So, and that is plantarium.uk. I'll send you the link, Anna. And we also have a little YouTube channel, which I'm hoping we will be able to interview you on, Anna, at some point in the near future.
That could be fun.
Yes, which will be fun, I'm sure. And that is, if you just do a search for Plantarium Astrology, it'll pop up.
Well, I'll make sure that there's links to everything.
Oh, thank you. Amazing.
Because I think your Plantarium project is so exciting.
Oh, thank you.
When I saw that in your newsletter, I thought, yes. So
amazing.
Fantastic. Thank you. And thank you all for watching. I want to thank you all who also have subscribed to this channel, as we seem to be at a landmark of over 2,000 subscribers. So thank you very, very much. And thank you for your continued support. This channel is a labor of love, and I am so happy that so many of you enjoy it. Next time, we're going to be looking at the soul and the zodiac. Until then, have a great week. Goodbye.
Bye.